So basically, I just think it's cool that Fortune here is a genderless void monster, and I stan them. Hey my loves, hope you're well. I'm back with another VR to the tag Top Tarot Trumps, started by the lovely Marsha of Musings by Marsha. And we are quite appropriately up to the Wheel of Fortune. As I sit to film this, it's just a couple of days off from the winter solstice here in the southern hemisphere, the summer solstice, I guess, in the northern hemisphere, which I just think is very apt given that the wheel has to do with cycles of all kinds. Just think it's great timing. So today I'm going to be showing 5 of my favorite wheel or wheel adjacent cards. I do say wheel adjacent because if you have seen any of my responses to this tag before, then you know that I include oracle cards as well as tarot cards. It's not quite within the bounds of the tag, but I think I'm allowed. So with that said, obviously I'm on my bullshit straight away. The first one I want to show today is Tyche. So in the Greek pantheon, this is who is primarily associated with fortune, the concept of fortune and fate. She's not just like a happy-go-lucky sort of figure, because as we know, good fortune is accompanied by or balanced by bad fortune, and so she kind of has a hand in both, which makes her a really interesting figure. Historically, she has been depicted holding a ball, which if you think about the idea of what goes up must come down, if you throw a ball up, it comes down. And also then the idea of unpredictability, like a ball can roll in many directions. So that's the comparison to the idea of fortune, that it can be unpredictable, that you can be up one day and down the next, that kind of thing. And again, that very spherical idea seems quite apt to the idea of the wheel of fortune. I think it's a concept that's definitely been used across cultures and across history. She's also often shown with a horn of plenty or, fruits of the harvest or things to depict the idea of being bountiful, because that's showing what fortune can bestow upon the person. Like, if she favors you, then you will receive this like bounty, this great fortune, good fortune. And it also shows what you'll be denied of if she doesn't favor you. In ancient depictions of this goddess, there was quite a lot of crossover with Demeter or Demeter. Things like the cornucopia, the crown, the association with harvests and having to sacrifice or wanting to sacrifice part of the harvest. And so it's theorized that in some places she may have been worshipped as a kind of aspect of Demeter, or they might have been seen as kind of like aspects of the same goddess in some ways. So that gives you a bit of an idea of what fortune is associated with. It's not only good fortune, it's cycles of fortune, things like seasons and even life and death. So it can be anything from, the light, fluffy kind of gambling idea to the more serious, deeper cycles that we think of, even reincarnation. So when I think of the Wheel of Fortune, definitely the first thing that comes to mind is Tyche. And as I've been searching through my cards to find my favorite wheels, I realized I was kind of looking through that lens. So I'm going to share with you my thoughts from that perspective, which leads quite nicely, I think, into the first of the tarot cards that I chose, which is this one from the Renaissance Tarot, which actually depicts Tyche, or as the book says, Fortune herself. So the Romanization or the Roman version of the same goddess is Fortuna. Fortuna, and this card is labeled as Chance in this deck. So instead of the wheel of symbols that you'd see in the RWS card, the wheel in this version is actually all of the major arcana cards. So I'll see if I can get a good view there. You can see it's got the segments for each of the major arcana cards, and that's what's represented in the background, which I think is a really interesting substitution. As well, the hands of this goddess are pointing up towards victory and down towards a little figure that's falling into the abyss as a kind of failure. So, the idea that she has a hand in both victory and failure, I think is quite an interesting thing to be reminded of in the card. There's a strange little blurb in the guidebook for this one that actually quotes Machiavelli. And it says, "Fortune is bald behind. That is, once she runs past, it will be too late to grab her, and so she must be seized as she approaches by the forelock." Which I get is supposed to be about seizing opportunity as soon as possible, but something about that language kind of creeps me out. I guess, reflection of the time in which this was published, or those words were originally published even. But regardless, I do like the way that the contents of the wheel itself is substituted in this card, and that's something that I noticed in most of my selections for this video, is that they all kind of substituted a lot of the aspects of symbolism from the Wheel of Fortune, but still retained the kind of essence of what this card is about, which I think this one does in a really nice way. Bring us to my next choice, of course, from the Fyodor Pavlov tarot. So here we have the goddess Fortuna again, and she's spinning the wheel of fate. So something that's been replaced here, which the artist talks about in the guidebook, is the symbols of the evangelists. So usually in this card we have these 4 symbols in the corner, which are an angel, an eagle, a lion, and a bull, and they represent either the 4 evangelists or 4 fixed astrological signs. Wow, say that 5 times fast. And in this deck, he's replaced those 4 instead by showing the 4 elements. So we've got earth, fire, air, and water. And I think that makes a lot of sense because, as he points out in the book, if you're not Christian or from a Christian background, then perhaps that other imagery isn't especially personal to you or doesn't mean a lot to you, but that the idea of the 4 elements is probably more relatable to anyone that's using tarot, especially because that's already incorporated in the structure of a tarot deck, which I think is pretty smart, honestly. I think it makes equally as much sense, maybe even more sense, and I think it's really nice aesthetically. Another thing that I like about this one is the encouragement to embrace the unpredictable. So again, in the guidebook, the author of this deck talks about how often when this card comes out in a reading, it's really hard to interpret. And that can actually sometimes mean we're not supposed to know or understand some part of the situation right now, and that instead we should get comfortable with chaos. And I think that's definitely something that I've found and that I relate to when I draw the Wheel of Fortune in readings. Oftentimes it seems to imply that there's something that we're not to know yet about the question that we're asking, and that we need to just embrace the unpredictability, which I love. The next one I wanted to show is from the Ethereal Visions Lunar Edition, and this wheel takes us back much closer to the RWS version. So we have the same symbolism in the wheel itself, and then we also have those 4 symbols that are around the corners of that card. In this one, I'm really actually quite fascinated by the figure, because in all of the other examples I've given so far, if there's a human on this card, it's quite a strong and clearly feminine figure. And in this card, all we have is 2 arms and a foot. So for one, we can't tell what gender this person is, but we also can't see their face. And swapping out a face for a black void, I think is kind of instinctively spooky, if you know what I mean. Like, when we see a figure of a human, we usually expect to see a face as well, even just subconsciously, precognitively, that's what we have been trained to see. So when we go to look and see nothing, I think it triggers a kind of like, I don't even know how to describe it, like a very base fear or uncertainty, a feeling of being not in control, which I think is very relevant to this card. As humans, we use facial expressions to tell people's mood and intent, like all the time, even without knowing that we're doing it. So when we expect to deploy that skill and then we're met by just nothingness, it's really abrupt, which I love. So basically, I just think it's cool that Fortune here is a genderless void monster, and I stan them. Finally, I wanted to show this card from the Cosmic Tarot. I know I'm on a bit of a roll with showing cards from this deck, but I'm really enjoying the way that it has translated a lot of the images from the tarot. For example, in this card, the symbols on the wheel itself have been replaced. So rather than what they were over here, we have the astrological symbols and the planetary symbols, and around the outside, instead of being the 4 evangelists or 4 fixed signs, we have the 4 elements. So I think that's a really lovely way of, I don't want to say modernizing, because I know that's a little bit loaded of a term, but I think it's a lovely way of reinterpreting this card. It still includes some Hebrew letters. I don't know if you can see it just there. Also there. But I know just personally, when I'm thinking about correspondences and the use of symbols, I'm much more inclined towards using something like a planetary symbol or an elemental symbol versus the alchemical and Hebrew symbols that were on the RWS one. So to me, I would find that just a bit more personable, a bit more easy to relate to, I guess you could say. So these have been my 5 favorite Wheel of Fortune or Wheel adjacent cards from different tarot and oracle decks. Thank you again to the wonderful Marsha. If you haven't already, go check out her original videos in the tag. They're full of beautiful examples of each card, and also they're full of lots of history and in-depth information that I found really insightful and really helpful with my own expanding my understanding of each card. If you're not already, please subscribe, and if you are already, thanks, that's really cool of you. And I will see you in the next one. Bye.